Good evening, everybody. We're going to keep this really quick and concise, and just in the interest of time. And let's just start by like around a quick introductions. I think would be in order. I know some of you guys have already spoken, like Karthik was alluding to. But yeah, a quick round of introductions, and we take it from there.
Hi guys, my name is Tushar and I'm the CEO of Persistence. We are focused on bringing enterprise use cases to relatively more public and permissionless blockchains. I'm also the co-founder of Cosmos India. Cosmos is the interoperability protocol. So a lot of protocols today like Ethereum, Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies like Dash, Ripple, and other protocols like Tezos, Cardano, they all exist in silo today. Cosmos is the interoperability layer sitting on top of them, allowing these blockchains that exist in silo today to talk to each other. Most recently, I also helped to set up the first properly structured, regulated crypto fund based out of Singapore called Lunex Ventures, which was the crypto arm of a traditional VC fund called Golden Gate Ventures. And at Lunex, we were doing both equity and token investments. Yep.
Hi, I'm Anurag. I'm co-founder and chief product officer at Matok Network. Matic Network is building a layer 2 solution based on Plasma on Ethereum. Primarily, we build a developer platform for these new kind of blockchain applications.
So I'm Karthik Iyer, as I introduced myself twice already. Besides being part of PDP Foundation, I run a company called Blockchain Monk. Blockchain Monk is one of the oldest consulting companies from what I understand in the space. We've been building solutions since 2016, done over 60 projects. You name a solution, supply chain management, provenance tracking, interbank check clearances, document management. Done 60 different projects for enterprises, working with Fortune 100 companies in 4 continents. Worked with pretty much every major technology, Fabric, Coda, worked with Solidity on Ethereum. In fact, we built one of the first, I was just showing our friend, the Tendermint application in 2017, 2018, the test network, Purity, one of the first applications. So, it's been an interesting journey to see how these things have evolved and fascinating times ahead.
Great. Thank you, guys. So let's start off. I just want to do one quick, very concise round with each of you. Number one, enterprise use case for blockchain in a particular industry for each of you guys.
I would say trade finance.
I would say, in general, removing the custodian of assets from fintech predominantly in the fintech sector is what I think is the most adjacent use case that makes sense today. So that's why we are seeing a lot of activity on that front. So wherever custodians are present in traditional fintech, there we are seeing a lot of initiatives. It will take some time, but that's where I see the most transaction upfront.
I was talking about this yesterday. The world economy is 74 trillion, out of which 3 trillion are intermediaries, rent-seeking intermediaries. The whole idea of disintermediation, trustless disintermediation, is remove the intermediaries. And so we are seeing, enterprises doing that in a great scale, right? I mean, if you can remove as many people as possible, you maximize profit of your company, maximize shareholder value and all of that. So I think blockchain is going to be everywhere. I mean, it's going to be invisible like the internet.
I think just to elaborate on why trade finance, even if it's not the biggest use case, I think that's where the opportunity is the largest. As far as B2B businesses go, I think that's one area which is highly, highly underserved in terms of especially the small to medium-sized enterprises getting access to financing.
Great, thank you. That was just basically to kind of set context, right, of what is possible, perhaps, and where we see application. Let me play devil's advocate here for a second and, be the big enterprise using other enterprise software, rent-seeking software, custodians, and stuff that already exists and is prevalent. So I think the basic question is, which I've been asked by a lot of people who we've approached to say, try and build solutions for. Uh, they all say the same thing. It's like, if it ain't broke, why fix it, right? But obviously we are here because we believe that something's broken. So what according to you guys is broken, if you would go into a little bit of detail?
So I think transparency is one. So when you talk about from a B2B or enterprise use case perspective, there have been several fraudulent activities that have been happening. So if to take concrete examples, the first use case that we're working on is an application called Comdex, which is a physical commodities marketplace. So physical commodities like soya, wheat, corn, barley, energy products like palm oil, coal. What happens today is, as far as the trading of these physical commodities globally goes, especially in the SME sector, all the trades happen through things like phone calls, WhatsApp messages, the document exchange happens through emails. And so that's where kind of the system breaks, right? Where because there are so many different tools and platforms, in case there are disputes between the buyer and seller, there are huge inefficiencies in terms of lawyers having to come in to be able to collect all the evidence and collect all the documentation, create that audit trail of events. So I think what is one of the biggest things that is broken is just that auditability or that verifiability of information. And also, like, one example that I keep giving is, we've read about this example where Ranbaxy and the Food and Drug Administration were part of this blockchain network, but they controlled the validators themselves. And so they both made a mistake and decided to actually change that data because they were controlling all the nodes. And so that's what happens. So this is an example within the blockchain industry, but that's what happens in traditional business as well, where if a business makes a mistake, you just go back and you overwrite information.
I think we'll get to like within the blockchain space, but just trying to replace.
Correct.
So the problem with kind of selling into the problem is selling into enterprises, right? So it's not that enterprises don't have relevant use cases. Selling into enterprise is a tough task because you have to educate the customer. And right now the general narrative is that and in my opinion, that blockchains, particularly in the CTO circle, for example, are seen, those who are not in the blockchain space as deep as we are in, make the presumption that these are like poor cousins of databases. So that's kind of the narrative that is there. But if I kind of, let's say, want to take an example, like I'll take an India specific example. Like a couple of months ago, there was this news about Karvi Securities, kind of a fraud. I mean, it's investigation going on, etc. But the basic problem was, like when you do stock trading in India, you sign up with a broker, you have to do a power of attorney attestation initially. So when you do a trade, the shares from your demat account move to the custodian, in this case Karvi, for example, right? So generally the process is like there is like a pool of where Karvi keeps its shares, and pool of money from the buyer and the seller both, right? And so they have obviously regulatory kind of oversight. But what happened in this case was Karvi kind of they're still under investigation. But what happened is, they kind of loaned out the shares, customer shares, in lieu of a loan, and lent it that money to a separate group company. Which is basically, what's been happening, what's been working since long. I mean, with good regulatory oversight, the system works. The whole concept of digitization in general, and now blockchains being a more better form of that, is to avoid these scenarios. I mean, why we have digitization in the first place is to reduce manual oversight. Now, when you have these kind of loopholes where entities can take advantage of these, that is where you need technology such as blockchain. Now, how do you go about convincing those guys to adopt this blockchain? That is a separate question. But in terms of a use case, absolutely, I think there are very specific scenarios that make absolute sense. The trick is, how do you operationalize these systems?
So what I'm hearing is there's a transparency problem and a mutability problem, in a sense. But trustlessness problem. Yes, of course. Karthik, I just like to go back to you because you said blockchains will be everywhere in enterprises, which kind of takes what they're saying and amplifies it 10 levels. So, if care to explain?
No, I spent 10 years working for Red Hat, SUSE, and Sun. I spent 10 years of my life working for the biggest open source companies in the world. Red Hat, SUSE, Sun, and another company called TerraSoft Solutions, selling Yellow Dog Linux, only Linux distribution on PowerPC. So I was doing enterprise software sales, technical sales for 10 years, selling millions of dollars of software to Fortune 100 companies. So a lot of these guys already have services on architecture. They have MySQL with replication, clustering, and archival, which is what a typical blockchain would do, right? So the question now is, why do you want to go and use the blockchain when your existing SOA, I can write a web service and then publish and consume the web service and then replicate it and then run the parallel database in a regulator's thing, archive it and all that stuff. I can have the same impact. So I think there are three phases to blockchain adoption, right? What I've seen so far. I've had 10 years talking to people in like 60 countries about some of these problems. And the real problem there is there is no value for blockchain within the organization. The value of the blockchain is the boundaries of organizations. As Tushar was saying, in consortia. So like Marco Polo, for example, trade finance, they brought together all these big people because there's a huge difference between actual risk and perceived risk. In East Africa, if you're like, let's say, a grain trader, the actual risk on the market is only 7%. The banks lend out at 24%. If you have to take money at 24%, what is the economic activity you have to do to repay the interest, let alone the loan? So you create this debt slave, cycle of debt slaves. So then you bring all these big lenders on the network, and then you have moderate risk, which is around 14%. Everybody wins. So I think these are scenarios where we are in an age of hyper collaboration. Companies have to do co-opetition. They have to compete and collaborate at the same time, which is what we're seeing with Google, right? They had to open handset alliance. They bought content providers. They got handset manufacturers and everybody in the network. And now Android's 98% market share. Everybody else is dead. Same with Libra. They've got some 100 companies in the network. They pretty much control 5 billion people in the planet, right? So we're going towards the age of hyper co-opetition. And the only way to do that is blockchain. There's no other goal. And so, which is why it's also very important for India to understand this, right? Because this is sort of a, vegetarian approach to dealing with blockchain, which, because without the token, there is no blockchain. There's no public blockchain. If you want to use a private blockchain, you'd rather just use a database. So these are things that we will have to talk about in great detail with the government as well.
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point, which kind of brings me to my next question. We've seen implementations of so-called blockchain POCs. The IBMs of the world, the PwCs of the world are all doing implementations, really small scale, nothing like really major. No one's overhauling their systems yet. And when this is the kind of scenario, but you're also talking about people collaborating and competing at the same time, and how do we kind of go about implementing something like a public blockchain, which is so far removed from the current idea of enterprises? Because as we all know, there are so many issues when it comes to public blockchains and tokens and things like that. So how does one go about breaking this whole idea that we are an enterprise and we'll use a private blockchain, but that's about it for this small little use case? How do you get people to really overhaul and say, let's us collaborate, let's keep SAP out for out of this transaction, and how do we see that happening over the next 3, 4, 5 years?
I mean, it's top line, bottom line value, right? I mean, organizations are driven by FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So, and that's what it's all about. If you're able to create the FUD, then you go and sell. But there's really, very significant amount of value that, I've been looking at use cases. For example, Consensus has been working on various projects. Vinay is a very close friend of mine. I was the managing director of Consensus in Asia. And we have long conversations about this. And, frankly speaking, this cooperation space where, for example, organizations have a lot of data and they want to fight against a monopoly. Like, for example, Amazon. Amazon, what does Amazon have? It's had 0 quarter of profit in the last 30 years, right? But its market cap's $1 trillion. Market cap's $1 trillion because the value of Amazon is the data. It has the power of God. It can predict how much Nike shoes they're going to sell over the next year. But all the other local guys don't have that. So if you create a data marketplace where people can come and sell data, right, then you compete against these guys. So the whole idea of decentralization has been about leveling the playing field, right? And so the organizations that are not really at the top can actually come up on a consortium and compete against these other guys. So I think the problem also is the blockchain people. The blockchain people just focused on, they fall in love with the technology without really understanding where the top line, bottom line value lies. If you don't solve a pain point, you can. I remember selling open source software to large companies, and the pain point there was IaaS. They were using IaaS where you can only run one IaaS instance on a machine. With Apache, you can run 10 Apache instances in one single computer. So you reduce the data center size by 1/10. And then Linux was everywhere. So that is what we need to do. We need to train salespeople. We've got excellent engineers, but we need these good salespeople to go and sell, like Tushar and others.
Of course, of course. I mean, so quickly, because both of you guys are. Oh yeah, of course. We have Roshan.
Hi guys.
Roshan from Marlin Protocol also joining us. Quickly trying to get you up to speed. We've been talking about obviously how do blockchains fit into enterprise, and we're kind of getting to the point where we're trying to see. This is what Karthik also mentioned, is that there is no blockchain without a token. But how do you get enterprises to actually say they'll adopt a blockchain that actually runs a cryptocurrency, right? So, any specific thoughts?
So today I would say a lot of value comes from basically enterprises overhauling their business processes in the names of blockchain, right? So you can see that a lot of use cases don't really require a blockchain, right? And yet enterprises are willing to go there because it basically replaces their legacy processes and makes them more efficient and so on, right? So in my opinion, a very good entry into the enterprise space is basically trying to replace their databases, right? There is a lot of craft built around legacy databases. There are a lot of legacy processes built around them, and try to replace everything at once, starting from the database, and that's where you get your foot in the door, and yeah, you can basically take it forward from there.
Sure. Both of you guys.
So I think the first thing is the narrative has to change. I think today the way you kind of put forth the question as well, there are only two options. It's a binary outcome, whether you're private or public. Our belief is that at Persistence is that it's not a binary conversation. It's not like you're either public or you're private. We believe that being permissioned or permissionless, being public or private is a spectrum, and you can sit on different ends of the spectrum. So our belief is similar to how the transition from the intranet to the internet happened in the mid-90s to kind of early 2000s, and similar to how the transition for enterprise tech at least happened from having on-premises servers to moving to the cloud. We believe that over a period of time, there's going to be a transition from completely private, closed, permission networks to relatively more open, permissionless networks. And so how do you make that transition from private to relatively more public blockchains? I think it has to be, my personal belief is that it can't happen overnight. There can't be a complete overhaul. Large businesses are like large ships. It takes a little bit of time for them to steer their direction. Startups can be extremely nimble, but when you're dealing with large enterprises, then how do you make that gradual shift? And you make that gradual shift, how we do it is, like for example, one of the biggest things we do is we abstract away token from the application layer. So what are the biggest issues why enterprises don't like to use public blockchains? So I think having a token is the big, so regulation is one of the aspects, but regulation is linked to token. There are multiple other problems of having a token. So, there's obviously regulatory uncertainty of having a token. Tokens can be volatile. You have to, pay things like gas, which is variable fees. You have to figure out how to implement custody solutions to be able to hold tokens. The second thing is, today in permissionless or public blockchains, you have anyone that can become a validator, for example, or validate transactions. Enterprises don't like that. They want these validators to be KYC'd, for example, to comply with local rules and regulations. They want their transactions and their application logic to be private. So I think those are the different things that need to be addressed in order to make it more palatable and digestible for enterprises to start using more permissionless, more open networks.
Yeah, sure. So I mostly agree that, blockchains, over the long term, blockchains are going to be getting used in enterprise wider than what we see right now. It's going to take time, right? But selling anything to the enterprise takes time, right? So you can't just say, go to a CTO and say that your current process runs on a database. Let's just put it on a blockchain. So that's generally that doesn't work, right? So what, in my opinion, is there are pain points that you sell into, right? In any software sale, right? Even in a general enterprise software sale, you have to sell into the pain point. If the enterprise, and because enterprises take some time to decide, there is they're kind of laggards of data sharing platforms that is coming out in the world. I don't think I've seen that kind of system being defined anywhere else. So that what that is going to be is it's kind of similar to the UPI framework here in India, but data sharing on top of it. So what is going to happen is, enterprises and even customers can share data from a lot of regulated entities like banks and insurance, and so a lot of data is going to flow between entities, right? So one underappreciated area of the whole entire blockchain space is, you can have privacy of data, privacy preserving tech that is also being built within the overall. So I think that is a very underappreciated area. And how do you share data securely with privacy preserving guarantees? I think that is also going to be a major theme. So if we can identify key focus areas, targeting these pain points, I'm sure we will find a foot in the door. And then over time, obviously, it will evolve to a stage where, let's say, the internet is right now compared to the 90s, I would assume.
Sure, I completely understand your point. I mean, I'd love to take the opportunity to plug our product into what you're talking about. But I'm going to skip it and not talk about NewFang, the private, So we're actually running out of time, but I'd love to ask this one last question. I had a few questions that would have led up to this, but this is something that is something that we've experienced because we are trying to do enterprise sales too, is business models, right? How does one go about making a blockchain solution palatable to an enterprise when it comes to business models? Because we know that in the decentralized world, we're talking about tokens and wallets and cryptographic keys and whatnot, right? But how do you make it palatable? I mean, Tushar was talking about some alternative solutions, but but across the board, if you guys have any thoughts. Karthik, you want to take that?
I mean, so tokens, perfect way. There's a book called Free, The Future of Radical Price by Chris Anderson, which came some 20 years, 15 years ago, whatever. So I gave a talk on how blockchains will promote the freemium business model, the free business model in 2011. So if you put my name, Karthik Iyer, and then FS Cons, you'll see the talk in Stockholm in 2011, talking about how tokens will actually liberate software. Because I'm an open source guy. Software has to be free, it has to be a fundamental right, and all that stuff. So if you use public software, right, public blockchain software, and you have a token, you can just give this software away for free. Because you'll have demand on the token, right? If they're going to run hundreds of millions of transactions on the network, you just give the software away for free, and then just provide the services around it, just like the Red Hat model. Yeah. The biggest exit last year was Red Hat, which IBM acquired for $35 billion. The biggest exit of the year. So you can actually build sustainable business models where you cross-subsidize. You don't charge on the product, you take on the product costs, and maybe you raise like boatloads of money on the ICO, your token price is going up, right? But then you also need to understand how to manage your token economy. So I gave a class in Singapore, I'm a mentor for accelerator called Longhash, on managing token economics. It cannot be a random number. It cannot be a billion tokens. There has to be a meaningful way to arrive at the token model. right? So you have to have econometric modeling, you need to have monetary policy, physical policy, all of that done. So a successful protocol that has good technology but also is able to do some of these things can just give the product away for free and then charge consulting services around that protocol. And we will see, Ethereum, for example, Consensus.
Yeah.
I mean, they've done like 30-40 million bucks last year. So
No, true. Absolutely true. So that is definitely one model. I'd of course like to understand from the rest of the panel where, people are really not open to tokens for because of the legal risk, regulatory risks. How do you position, say, a Matic to an enterprise customer?
So, see, the problem is that, so when we started in the blockchain field, right? So the whole concept came from a decentralization perspective. And so the whole narrative typically is around tokens and, transactions such. But there have been like various new abstractions that are being built, which kind of take away the transaction being paid by the user kind of a meta narrative, right? So essentially, you can actually, from an educational perspective, it can be seen as like a trustless cloud kind of, it's not an exact analogy, but what I'm trying to say is that the token thing can be easily abstracted. It's not that big of a concern. Now, whether that token is from a public blockchain like Ethereum or from, let's say, a consortium blockchain, I mean, let's not get into that. But that basic thing of transactions that can be easily positioned as like a cloud subscription billing model kind of a thing. From a business model perspective, what I want to say is, from an enterprise point of view, that whole shift from on-premise to SaaS kind of, has, I think, has, kind of matured to such an extent that, when Salesforce was a startup and they were targeting Oracle as like the big elephant in the room kind of a position, but now Salesforce itself is such a big guy, right? So you no longer have the benefits of a SaaS, typically that you would, a general SaaS startup would say, comparing themselves to an on-premise model, right? So now even SaaS startups have, kind of, or SaaS companies have kind of been looking, they look like the on-premise players of yore. So I think the time is ripe that a new kind of business model will arise where, I agree that maybe the software can be free, but there is a cost to maintaining all this infrastructure. And so typically there will be like a base layer and there might be more front-end clients and, different. So it's like more like an open data ecosystem could develop. That is what my theory is.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. But I'd love for like Roshan to quickly chime in and a quick thought on whether you should probably take the token route or completely abstract it away and make it more palatable.
So I would say selling to enterprises is all about managing risk, right? Your usual sales pitch for blockchains is I am my own bank, I own my money, I own my token, all that stuff, right? So when you tell this to an enterprise, what they see is, yeah, I own my money. It's just as easy for me to lose my money, right? Yeah, I am my own bank. It's just as easy for me to screw it up, right? So figure a sales pitch that basically manages this risk for them, right? Yeah, true, it is your money, but it's not as easy for you to lose your private key and basically lose all your money, right? And yeah, you can be your bank. That doesn't mean that all transactions are final and that's it, you're screwed, right? If you do something wrong. So figure out the narrative around how you manage risk for enterprise, and that would be your key to basically convincing them to actually adopt you.
I think quickly, so I think I would like to echo what Karthik said and to some extent what Anurag said as well. So huge fan of the Red Hat Linux model. And again, I think as Karthik rightly pointed out, the beautiful thing about this industry that we are in is that you can actually capture some value. It remains to be seen, but you can actually capture some value at the protocol level as well, and then you can keep capturing value at the application layer as well, along with having kind of services and things like that. So I think, it's a lot of the things that can be implemented have been implemented in other industries, but I think that token element kind of has that, kind of separate, again, I think, and this is something I say as well. the non-vegetarian zinc to the fuel to the car, so to speak. And I think that leads to kind of you managing two products, right? So you're actually building your own product, and the token itself is a product that needs to be managed. But I think there can be some interesting, like Terra, I think, is doing something fascinating. South Korean payments company, where they build in incentives for people using e-commerce websites and provide discounts to them in very, very innovative ways using the token. But I don't think we have time to get into that. But I think something like that you can weave in extremely, extremely interesting business models.
So it basically looks like crypto economics is going to play a big role, but a lot of innovation is definitely required. But staying true to the token model and the public blockchain model perhaps is still probably the way to go, is the general consensus that we are getting, but trying to make it more palatable in a sense also.
I think, and this is, I've been looking at kind of the Indian crypto ecosystem. If you came in 2018 and you said something like this, it's amazing that we have unanimous consensus on this panel about this narrative. You came in 2018 and you said that, you would be taken down on the panel. And so I think the narrative is shifting, and that's great.
Yeah, I was also very pleasantly surprised, but of course, this makes a world of sense. And thank you guys for being here. A round of applause for everybody. Questions, anybody? I think we can take one.
My question is to Karthik. So when enterprises, generally for adoption, it is important for them to do is budgeting, right? And what happens with token is they're so volatile. So there's a gas fee, which is variable over time. How do a person sitting in a finance office determine what is going to be the gas value? So that's why I guess the enterprises are hesitant to adopt anything that's public and token. Just your take on
Well, I mean, as Tushar was saying, I mean, there are a lot of these tools that are coming which will abstract the token. You won't even see there is a token. So you'd pay an INR, and that's all you'd see. And also, the problem right now is that crypto is controlled by a few people, a few miners, right? As time goes by, there'll be perfect distribution of the tokens. These few players who are coming and playing the market will just vanish, right? Especially with larger protocols like Ethereum and others. And so then we'll see price stabilization. Price stabilization is already happening with Ethereum, right? It's not like going from 1,400 to, I showed somebody my Ethereum private sale for 7 cents, right? It didn't go from 7 cents to 1,400 and then come back to 120. So this price stabilization is happening right now. And so then you don't have to worry about it. So you put a budget there and it would be like 10, 15, 20% of that. And you're not putting all your data on the blockchain. You're only putting the hashes and everything that you need to validate and stuff like that on the blockchain, right? Nobody puts the entire database on the blockchain. Nobody does that. I hope your organization is not doing that, right? Like taking a 2 terabyte file right into the blockchain.
Oops.
So these are places. It's a layer for adding. Blockchain is like a layer for adding accountability, trust, and all these things. And so it's coming, and you're seeing first signs of that in Europe, United States, and places like that, where serious governmental applications are going into the blockchain, public blockchains. So I don't think there'll be a huge problem there. But right now, it's still a problem. Price volatility is still a problem.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you all so much.